In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, there is no compulsion in religion. Truth stands out clear from error. Quran 2:256. This verse is often cited to emphasize Islam's teaching of peace, tolerance, and religious freedom. It stands as a principle of restraint and justice. However, on March 19, 2015 in Kabul, Afghanistan, this teaching was tragically overshadowed by a violent act that shocked the world. Farkhunda Malikzada, a 27-year-old Afghan woman, was falsely accused of burning the Quran and brutally murdered by a mob right in the heart of the city. In this video, we will explore how this misinterpretation of religious teachings led to such extreme violence. We'll also examine the individuals involved, the socio-cultural factors that played a role in this crime, and the aftermath of her death. Most importantly, we will discuss the correct interpretations of Islamic texts and how this tragedy could have been prevented. Who was Farkhunda Malikzada? Farkhunda Malikzada was a devout Muslim woman and a scholar of Islamic law. Born into a traditional Afghan family in 1988, Farkhunda grew up in a society where gender inequality was the norm. Nevertheless, her parents valued education, and she pursued religious studies with the hope of becoming a religious teacher. She was passionate about understanding Islam and believed that her faith, when properly followed, was a path to justice and equality. Farkhunda was a strong advocate against superstitions and practices she believed were un-Islamic. Her primary concern was the widespread belief in amulets, charms, and talismans sold by shrine keepers near mosques. These objects were used by the Afghan public to ward off evil, attract wealth, or heal illnesses. To Farkhunda, these practices were a distortion of Islam's core teachings. Her mission was to challenge these deep-rooted superstitions that she saw as taking advantage of the vulnerable. She was committed to her faith, but her approach made her unpopular with those who profited from these superstitions. This tension set the stage for the confrontation that would lead to her untimely death. The incident, a misinterpreted verse. On March 19, 2015, Farkhunda visited the Shah Do Shamshira Mosque in central Kabul. Like many times before, she confronted the shrine keepers selling charms to the public. She accused them of preying on the fears of worshippers, using Islam as a cover to sell objects that had no place in the religion. The confrontation escalated. The shrine keeper, enraged by her accusations, retaliated by falsely accusing Farkhunda of burning a Quran. In Afghanistan, an accusation of Quran desecration can result in fatal consequences, as the act of disrespecting the Quran is seen as an unforgivable sin. Word of the accusation quickly spread through the streets. Bystanders, hearing that someone had desecrated the holy book, gathered around in growing numbers. At the heart of this tragedy lies a misinterpretation of a Quranic verse that many in the mob believed justified their actions. Quran 4:140 reads, "And it has already come down to you in the book that when you hear the verses of Allah recited, they are denied by them and ridiculed, so do not sit with them until they enter into another conversation." The verse emphasizes turning away from those who mock or deny the Quran, but makes no mention of violence. However, many extremists twist this verse to justify harsh reactions toward blasphemy, claiming that any insult to the Quran deserves punishment, even death. However, in Farkhunda's case, the misinterpretation of religious doctrine fueled the anger of the crowd, leading to horrific consequences. The crime, mob justice unleashed. The mob's reaction was swift and vicious. Despite Farkhunda's attempts to defend herself and assert her innocence, her voice was drowned out by shouts of blasphemer and infidel. The crowd dragged her through the streets of Kabul, assaulting her with sticks, stones, and their bare hands. As she pleaded for her life, dozens of men participated in the violence, while others stood by and filmed the brutal scene on their phones. Several police officers were present at the scene. However, they made little effort to stop the attack. Some witnesses even claimed that certain officers actively encouraged the mob. The beating continued for nearly an hour, with Farkhunda barely conscious by the end. In a final brutal act, her body was run over by a car before being set on fire. All this occurred in broad daylight, just a short distance from the presidential palace, government buildings, and police headquarters. The sheer brutality of the attack stunned the world. How could such a horrific act of violence happen in a public place, with authorities present in broad daylight? The answer lies not only in the misinterpretation of religious texts, but also in the deeply ingrained cultural norms that allow mob justice to prevail unchecked in certain societies. The aftermath: seeking justice. As news of Farkhunda's death spread, so did the truth. Farkhunda had not burned a Quran. An investigation revealed that the shrine keeper had fabricated the accusation to silence her criticism. She was entirely innocent. This revelation sparked outrage across Afghanistan and the world. Thousands took to the streets in protest, demanding justice for Farkhunda. In Kabul, her funeral procession became a moment of defiance. In a symbolic gesture, women's rights activists carried her coffin, an act traditionally reserved for men in Afghan society. The Afghan government responded by arresting several individuals involved in the attack. In May 2015, 4 men were sentenced to death for their roles in Farkhunda's murder, while 8 others received lengthy prison sentences. Additionally, 11 police officers were convicted for failing to intervene and stop the mob. However, the death sentences were later reduced on appeal, leading to public outcry and frustration that true justice had not been served. Despite the legal proceedings, many felt that the system had failed Farkhunda. The leniency shown toward those convicted underscored the broader issues within Afghanistan's judicial system, where women's rights and protection from violence remain deeply inadequate. Correcting the misinterpretation. Islamic scholars and religious leaders worldwide condemned the mob's actions, emphasizing that the faith advocates for patience, dialogue, and justice. Accusations of blasphemy or disrespect toward the Quran must be handled through lawful and peaceful means, not through violent extrajudicial measures. Islamic scholars pointed out that even in cases of actual blasphemy, the Quran and Hadith emphasize legal recourse and a fair trial, rather than vigilante justice. Farkhunda's death was not only a gross miscarriage of justice, but also a profound violation of Islamic principles. Shrine keepers who sold these items for personal gain often manipulated vulnerable individuals, presenting themselves as religious authorities. In confronting the shrine keeper, Farkhunda was not only challenging superstition, but also challenging a man's authority. This was significant in a society where patriarchal norms are deeply entrenched. As a woman, Farkhunda was expected to remain silent, obedient, and deferential to male authority. Her decision to speak out publicly against the shrine keeper's practices was seen as an act of defiance that crossed social boundaries. The mob's reaction was not just about the alleged burning of the Quran, it was also about silencing a woman who dared to challenge male authority. Her death prompted widespread discussions about the role of the police, the judiciary, and Afghan society's treatment of women. Farkhunda Malikzada's tragic death was the result of a false accusation, a misinterpretation of religious texts, and deep-seated social and cultural issues. By understanding the events that led to her murder, we can work to prevent future tragedies and ensure that the values of justice, peace, and equality prevail.